waited until the misty curtain should rise. The sun would not be long in dispersing the vapors. "Well?" asked Michael. "The fog is beginning to roll away, brother," replied Nadia, "and it will soon be clear." "Then you do not see the surface of the water yet?" "Not yet." "Have patience, little father," said Nicholas. "All this will soon disappear. Look! Here comes the breeze. It is driving away the fog. The trees on the opposite hills are already appearing. It is sweeping, flying away. The kindly rays of the sun have condensed all that mass of mist. Ah, how beautiful it is, my poor fellow! And how unfortunate that you cannot see such a lovely sight!" "Do you see a boat?" asked Michael. "I see nothing of the sort," answered Nicholas. "Look well, friend, on this and the opposite bank, as far as your eye can reach. A raft, even a canoe?" Nicholas and Nadia, grasping the bushes on the edge of the cliff, bent over the water. The view they thus obtained was extensive. At this place the Yenisei is not less than a mile in width, and forms two arms, of unequal size, through which the waters flow swiftly. Between these arms lie several islands, covered with alders, willows, and poplars, looking like verdant ships, anchored in the river. Beyond rise the high hills of the eastern shore, crowned with forests, whose tops were then empurpled with light. The Yenisei stretched on either side as far as the eye could reach. The beautiful panorama lay before them for a distance of 50 versts. But not a boat was to be seen. All had been taken away or destroyed, according to order. Unless the Tartars should bring with them materials for building a bridge of boats, their march towards Irkutsk would certainly be stopped for some time by this barrier, the Yenisei. "I remember," said Michael, "that higher up, on the outskirts of Krasnoiarsk, there is a little quay. There the boats touch. Friend, let us go up the river, and see if some boat has not been forgotten on the bank." Nadia seized Michael's hand and started off at a rapid pace in the direction indicated. If only a boat or a barge large enough to hold the kibitka could be found, or even one that would carry just themselves, Michael would not hesitate to attempt the passage. 20 minutes after, all three had reached the little quay, with houses on each side quite down to the water's edge. It was like a village standing beyond the town of Krasnoiarsk. But not a boat was on the shore, not a barge at the little wharf, nothing even of which a raft could be made large enough to carry 3 people. Michael questioned Nicholas, who made the discouraging reply that the crossing appeared to him absolutely impracticable. "We shall cross," answered Michael. The search was continued. They examined the houses on the shore, abandoned like all the rest of Krasnoiarsk. They had merely to push open the doors and enter. The cottages were evidently those of poor people, and quite empty. Nicholas visited one, Nadia entered another, and even Michael went here and there and felt about, hoping to light upon some article that might be useful. Nicholas and the girl had each fruitlessly rummaged these cottages and were about to give up the search, when they heard themselves called. Both ran to the bank and saw Michael standing on the threshold of a door. "Come!" he exclaimed. Nicholas and Nadia went towards him and followed him into the cottage. "What are these?" asked Michael, touching several objects piled up in a corner. "They are leathern bottles," answered Nicholas. "Are they full?" "Yes, full of kumis. We have found them very opportunely to renew our provisions." Kumis is a drink made of mare's or camel's milk, and is very sustaining, and even intoxicating, so that Nicholas and his companions could not but congratulate themselves on the discovery. "Save one," said Michael, "but empty the others." "Directly, little father." "These will help us to cross the Yenisei." "And the raft?" "Will be the kibitka itself, which is light enough to float. Besides, we will sustain it, as well as the horse, with these bottles." "Well thought of, little father!" exclaimed Nicholas. "And by God's help we will get safely over, though perhaps not in a straight line, for the current is very rapid."
"What does that matter?" replied Michael. "Let us get across first, and we shall soon find out the road to Irkutsk on the other side of the river."
"To work then!" said Nicholas, beginning to empty the bottles. One full of kumis was reserved, and the rest, with the air carefully fastened in, were used to form a floating apparatus. 2 bottles were fastened to the horse's sides to support it in the water. 2 others were attached to the shafts to keep them on a level with the body of the machine, thus transformed into a raft. This work was soon finished. "You will not be afraid, Nadia?" asked Michael. "No, brother," answered the girl. "And you, friend?" "I?" cried Nicholas. "I am now going to have one of my dreams realized, that of sailing in a cart." At the spot where they were now standing the bank sloped, and was suitable for the launching of the kibitka. The horse drew it into the water, and they were soon both floating. As to Serko, he was swimming bravely. The 3 passengers, seated in the vehicle, had with due precaution taken off their shoes and stockings, but thanks to the bottles the water did not even come over their ankles. Michael held the reins, and, according to Nicholas's directions, guided the animal obliquely, but cautiously, so as not to exhaust him by struggling against the current. So long as the kibitka went with the current all was easy, and in a few minutes it had passed the quays of Krasnoiarsk. It drifted northwards, and it was soon evident that it would only reach the opposite bank far below the town. But that mattered little. The crossing would have been made without great difficulty, even on this imperfect apparatus, had the current been regular. But, unfortunately, there were whirlpools in numbers, and soon the kibitka, notwithstanding all Michael's efforts, was irresistibly drawn into one of these. There the danger was great. The kibitka no longer drifted, but spun rapidly round, inclining towards the center of the eddy, like a rider in a circus. The horse could scarcely keep his head above water, and ran a great risk of being suffocated. Serko had been obliged to take refuge in the carriage. Michael knew what was happening. He felt himself drawn round in a gradually narrowing line, from which they could not get free. How he longed to see, to be better able to avoid this peril, but that was no longer possible. Nadia was silent, her hands clinging to the sides of the cart, which was inclining more and more towards the center of depression. And Nicholas, did he not understand the gravity of the situation? Was it with him phlegm or contempt of danger, courage or indifference? Was his life valueless in his eyes, and, according to the Eastern expression, an hotel for 5 days, which, whether one is willing or not, must be left the 6th? At any rate, the smile on his rosy face never faded for an instant. The kibitka was thus in the whirlpool, and the horse was nearly exhausted, when, all at once, Michael, throwing off such of his garments as might impede him, jumped into the water; then, seizing with a strong hand the bridle of the terrified horse, he gave him such an impulse that he managed to struggle out of the circle, and getting again into the current the kibitka drifted along anew. "Hurrah!" exclaimed Nicholas. 2 hours after leaving the wharf, the kibitka had crossed the widest arm of the river, and had landed on an island more than 6 versts below the starting point. There the horse drew the cart onto the bank, and an hour's rest was given to this courageous animal. Then the island having been crossed under the shade of its magnificent birches, the kibitka found itself on the shore of the smaller arm of the Yenisei. This passage was much easier. No whirlpools broke the course of the river in this second bed, but the current was so rapid that the kibitka only reached the opposite side 5 versts below. They had drifted 11 versts in all. These great Siberian rivers across which no bridges have as yet been thrown are serious obstacles to the facility of communication. All had been more or less unfortunate to Michael Strogoff. On the Irtych, the boat which carried him and Nadia had been attacked by Tartars. On the Obi, after his horse had been struck by a bullet, he had only by a miracle escaped from the horsemen who were pursuing him. In fact, this passage of the Yenisei had been performed the least disastrously. "That would not have been so amusing," exclaimed Nicholas, rubbing his hands, as they disembarked on the right bank of the river, "if it had not been so difficult."
"That which has only been difficult to us, friend," answered Michael Strogoff, "will perhaps be impossible to the Tartars."
End of Book 2, Chapter 7.